Welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Today we'll be continuing our discussion of consciousness in response to the video request from Trucking Piper Bob. Well, today, as we continue in our world's longest ever VR, this is probably going to be in like 4 or 5 videos by the time we're all done, at least 4. I am enjoying one of my probably top 3 tobaccos of all time, the Bourbon Barrel Aged Plum Pudding. If you've never tried it, it's wonderful, and this tobacco is magic. And it's a bit pricey, but very much worth it. It is a bit damp, so it takes some time to dry out or a lot of maintenance. So be aware of that. It's a rich, deep, sweet, earthy, cool smoke, long, slow smoke, full mouthfeel. It's just all around just a wonderful tobacco. Not one you want to break out for, a quick, 30 minutes Prince pipe or something else like that. You got to take some time with it, but definitely worth it. Well, I am just now returning from a trip to California. So I have been gone for over a week, doing some teaching and so forth. And I had these grand notions about perhaps trying to connect with some of our presenters out there in the Central California coast. I'd love to meet up with Israel, but Southern California is pretty far away from where I was at. But I know Spencer and Dave out there are in the Central California coast. So guys, I had these grand notions of trying to hook up with you out there and smoke a pipe, but I was just busy from sunup to sundown every day out there. So I do make regular trips out there though. So one of these times I will. We'll get together. But had a good time. Lovely weather, nice cool mornings, warm afternoons, very sunny. So what little I did get to see of the weather anyway, I said it was a bit busy. I also want to mention this 2 more videos should knock this out, Bob, hopefully, and then we'll try to get to any questions on this. But then after this, I have 2 other requests. And I mentioned one already. Cliff asked about a video on heaven, specifically with people in heaven, be able to view, interact, or have knowledge of people here on earth. Second one is on the nunchaku. So we'll be getting back to some of the martial arts content. So I'll discuss kind of like the history, formation, use of nunchaku. And yeah, I'll do like a wee bit of a demo. Probably be doing that demo in my garage, because the last thing I want to be doing is putting on my full gi and standing in my backyard, going through a nunchaku kata. At the very least, it's going to, pose some questions. But I'll try to get to that sometime the next week. I've got a busy week coming up as well, because I'm just getting back, so I've got to catch up. And happily, I didn't have to preach this morning, so I just got to attend church, didn't have to prepare anything. But tomorrow, Monday morning, is going to be hit the ground running. But I will get to that. I will get to that. So. But consciousness. I made notes so I wouldn't get too far afield, because there is a lot going on here. First of all, the difficulty even in defining what consciousness is. Simply put, it's the sentient self. It's the knowledge of self. But even that can be bifurcated to inner knowledge and outer knowledge, objective and subjective, what I know in and of myself, and what I know interacting with the outside world and other conscious beings. So there's an inner consciousness and, I guess you would say, outer consciousness, engagement with the outer consciousness. And then there's also the difficulty of the mind-body problem, which is that thought, consciousness, imagination are non-material, right? I can think about a bicycle right now. It doesn't mean that that bicycle physically exists. Um, but when I think and I have interactions with my own body, then it goes from thought transference into actual physical maneuvers. So ligaments and tendons firing and neurons firing and muscles contracting and all these various different things that happen in the physical world based on conscious thought, which is non-physical. In the science and religion community, we refer to that as the causal joint problem because it's the same difficulty we have between spiritual and physical interaction. So there's a lot going on there. And then when you reach into it and from a biblical perspective, then you have nefesh, nefesh haya, and then you also have ruach. So there's many different component parts here. And there's a myriad of different ways you can have this discussion. But considering this VR to Bob is already going to be exceedingly long, I thought just to make things simple, I'll break it down into two rather large camps when it comes to the idea of consciousness. So we're going to be talking about consciousness as an emergent property and supervenience. So we'll start today with consciousness as emergent property. Now, emergent theory essentially is that the sum is greater than the parts. So a bunch of building materials put together into a home, right? It's a home in its entirety. The physical structure, your family being there, your friends, or however you define what home means to you. But home is a concept, right? Home is a concept that is greater than a physical structure. If you take a home and break it down into its component parts, it becomes building materials. But those building materials in a stack are not a home, right? They're only a home when they come together as a whole. Then this larger concept, this larger idea comes out of that. That's kind of the idea of consciousness as an emergent property, that you have all the physical constructs of the brain come together and create something bigger than themselves. So the little gray cells all put together mean something more than just the cellular structure of the brain. Now, if you want a good source for this discussion, Theology for a Scientific Age by Arthur Peacock is an excellent book. It gets really deep into this. Because emergent theory in consciousness, as I'm discussing it here, is different than emergent theory as it's been discussed in many other contexts. It just takes a bit of maintenance. So this is not like the neo-idealism, not neo-idealism. It's not that. It's not like the emergentist of the British in the 1920s. They had the idea that all reality was thought. That's the higher reality. And physical reality is a product of that. So you can think of it like emergent theory, the way I was describing it with the brain cells coming together and forming a consciousness. This is kind of going the other direction. The idea that thought is a true reality, and then as thought coalesces, it becomes something like physical, right? So we're not talking about that idea, that kind of emergent theory from neo-idealism is well, it still exists, but it's certainly not a part of any kind of contemporary discussions in the last 50, 60 years when we talk about consciousness from a theological perspective. And again, that's where we're going with this discussion because that's my wheelhouse. So, but the other direction that people often go with emergent theory is kind of like a reductive physicalism, where consciousness can be reduced to firing neurons, right? And this is not that either, because emergent theory, when it comes to a theological explanation of consciousness, is not reductive physicalism. It's non-reductive physicalism, because there is a physical aspect to it, both in terms of the biblical account of human life and thought and consciousness and soul and spirit, and also in creedal accounts. Because the problem with reductive physicalism, how far you go down. If you keep trying to break everything down into its component parts, where do you stop? You can't. It's like the old adage of cut a piece of paper in half and keep cutting it. And if you had the proper tools, how far could you keep going? Well, you would keep going for infinity, because you cannot remove matter from existence. That's the same thing with physicalism, reductive physicalism. If you try to say that we can take consciousness and break it down into just functions of the brain, okay, well, that's consciousness is a function of the brain. How does the brain function? Okay, the brain functions by firing neurons. How do firing neurons function? Firing neuron functions by this cellular activity. Okay, how do the cells function? And you keep going down and down and down. It's like the turtle argument. The Earth stands on a turtle, and what does that turtle stand on? It's turtles all the way down, right? At some point, the argument becomes ridiculous. So you can't necessarily take the idea of consciousness and parse it into reductive physicalism, because there's nowhere that the reductive physicalism ever stops. So this is not that. Because for the scholars who have engaged in this idea of emergent consciousness from a theological perspective, they understand that there's a tie between the conscious thought and physical reality. So how do we understand that from a Christian perspective? Well, this is where we have nefesh haya, and ruach. There is a difference in the level of consciousness that humans are imparted with. We are given nefesh haya, so the breath of life in action. Animalistic responses is nefesh. Nefesh haya is the active interaction, right? It's something special that God has imparted to us. So our consciousness is an emergent property. This is this theory. This is not my theory, but consciousness is an emergent property of our physical selves, but in a special divine interaction with God. God creating our physical bodies in such a manner that there is this emergent property that acts as a conduit, as a pathway of communication between us and the divine reality, that allows us to understand the divine other. Now, when this happened in the process of our evolution, I discussed this in my theological anthropology series, the couple of videos I did on theological anthropology. So if you have a specific question towards that, like where this happened and how this happened, you can go back and look at that video. I won't redo that here because we're already at almost 14 minutes. But the simple answer, the simple answer is that human consciousness is something different and special. It's something that humans in particular have, and we have it in order to have an interaction with the divine other. And that happens as an emergent property of our physical selves, but coming together to create something greater, something beyond just what the physical reality holds on to. Because when we go the other direction and we try to say that it's an emergent property, but we can reduce it to its physical components, there's no way to stop reducing. You just keep going down and down and down and down and down. And that's assuming you can make the leap from thought to physical reaction, because they can track in the brain, like when you have thoughts and things like that, which sections of the brain light up and so on and so forth. But they still can't really pin down the language of thought, how thought occurs, and how thought has that interaction between the physical and the non-physical, that little gap there in between. So if you think about it from an emergent perspective in the scientific manner, there's a couple of major problems there. which we have answers for in theology because it's a property of divine action on our physical selves that has created this consciousness. So it's the physical coming together to create something greater, the way building blocks come together to create a home, the way physical reality creates a concept, but it's through the divine direction of God. So that is emergent theory. And then in the next video, I'll get into supervenience, which goes the other direction. So emergent theory is kind of like going down up, and then supervenience, or more specifically non-reductive supervenient causalism, goes from the top down. And we'll see how that works in the next video. But until then, I'm going to get back to my plum pudding and enjoy my afternoon. I hope you do as well. Have a lovely week, and as always, happy reading.